After dropping my son at the airport, our housekeeper, who has worked for us for 10 years, texted me 3 chilling words. Don't go home. She followed it with a command that froze the blood in my veins. Check the cameras. I pulled my Bentley over to the shoulder of the Long Island Expressway, my hazard lights blinking against the gray New York sky. My hands, usually steady from 40 years of navigating the cutthroat world of hedge funds, were trembling as I unlocked my phone. I opened the security app connected to the hidden cameras in my study. What I saw made my heart stop, and then restart with a cold, rhythmic fury I had not felt since my days on Wall Street. My son Bradley and his wife Monica were supposed to be on a flight to the Maldives. I had just dropped them at JFK Terminal 4 not 40 minutes ago. I had hugged my boy, handed him an envelope with $50,000 in cash for incidentals, and told him to enjoy the honeymoon they never had. I watched them walk through security, waving goodbye to the generous old man who paid for everything. But on my phone screen, there they were. They were in my private study. Monica was holding a bottle of my 1982 Petrus, a wine I was saving for my 70th birthday. She wasn't just drinking it. She was pouring it onto the Persian rug, laughing as the crimson liquid stained the wool. I turned the volume up on my phone. The sound was crisp. Bradley was sitting in my leather chair, his feet up on my mahogany desk, spinning my antique globe with the tip of his shoe. He looked nothing like the grateful son who had just hugged me. His face was twisted in a sneer of pure contempt. He asked her if she was sure the old man was gone. Monica laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that grated against my ears. She said, "Of course he is gone. He thinks we are in the air. By the time he comes back from his little drive, we will have the safe drilled." Then she said the words that changed everything. She looked directly at where my hidden camera was, though she did not know it was there, and raised her glass. She proposed a toast to the herbal tea. She said she had doubled the dose of arsenic this morning. She told my son that the doctor said with his heart condition, it will look exactly like a natural cardiac arrest. 3 more days, Bradley. Just 3 more days of tea, and $50 million is ours. I sat there on the side of the highway, the rush of traffic shaking my car, but I felt absolute silence. My own son. The boy I had raised alone after his mother passed. The boy whose debts I had paid, whose failures I had cushioned, whose lies I had chosen to believe because I was a lonely old man who wanted a family. He was not just stealing from me, he was actively killing me. I watched Bradley laugh and kiss her. He told her she was a genius. He said he couldn't wait to dump my body in the ground, so he could finally sell the house and buy that Ferrari. I turned off the phone. I did not scream. I did not cry. I calmly removed the SIM card from my phone and snapped it in half. I rolled down the window and tossed the pieces onto the asphalt. The Garrison Ford who wanted to be a loving father died in that moment on the side of the expressway. The man who remained was the Garrison Ford who had destroyed competitors for sport in the 80s. They wanted my heart to stop. Instead, they just jump-started it. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives piece by piece without them even knowing I was in the same room, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut a toxic person out of your life to save your own. I merged back into traffic, but I did not turn around at the next exit to go home. Going home was a death sentence. If I walked through that door, I would have to confront them. They would lie. They might even try to finish the job right there with a pillow or a shove down the stairs. Number. Confrontation is for amateurs. Destruction is for professionals, and I was a professional. I needed to think. My mind raced back to the last 6 months. The dizziness, the shortness of breath, the way Monica had suddenly become so concerned with my health, insisting on preparing my evening tea herself. Special herbs from an organic market, she had said. It will help you sleep, Dad. I had thanked her. I had drunk every drop, touched by her kindness. Every sip was a step toward my grave. And the doctor, Dr. Thorne, Bradley's golf partner, the man who dismissed my symptoms as early-onset Alzheimer's and prescribed me sedatives. It was not a diagnosis. It was a conspiracy. I drove past the exit for the Hamptons. I kept driving west toward the city. I needed a fortress. I needed a war room. But first, I needed to know exactly how much time I had left. If the arsenic was already in my system, I could be dead before I executed my plan. I pulled into a small, nondescript urgent care clinic in Queens, far away from anyone who knew the name Garrison Ford. I used cash. I used a fake name. I demanded a full toxicology panel. The nurse looked at me strangely. A well-dressed man in a $6,000 suit sitting on a plastic chair in a waiting room that smelled of bleach and sickness. While I waited for the results, I bought a burner phone from a convenience store across the street. My hands were steady now. The plan was forming in my mind, layer by layer, complex and lethal. I sent one text message to the only person in that house who had warned me. Rosa. I typed simply. I am safe. Act normal. Do not let them know you warned me. I will be watching. Rosa had risked her life to send me that text. If Bradley knew she had alerted me, he would not hesitate to hurt her. She was the only family I had left now. The doctor called me in. He looked concerned. He asked me if I worked with industrial chemicals or pesticides. I told him no. He showed me the chart. My blood showed elevated levels of arsenic and traces of digoxin, a heart medication I was not prescribed. The combination was designed to induce a heart attack that would leave no questions asked for a man of my age. The doctor said I needed to go to a hospital immediately. He said the levels were dangerous. I looked him in the eye and told him I would handle it. I asked him for a prescription for a chelating agent to help flush the poison out. He hesitated, but the wad of $100 bills I placed on the table helped him find his pen. I walked out of that clinic with a bottle of pills and a death warrant for my son's future. They thought I was a confused old man losing his memory. They thought I was their prey. But they forgot one thing. Before I was a father, I was a shark, and there is blood in the water now. I checked into the Pierre Hotel under the name of a shell company I hadn't used in 20 years. I requested the penthouse suite. Paying in cash I kept in the emergency safe in my trunk. As I stood on the balcony looking out over Central Park, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city I once ruled. I opened my laptop and logged into the remote server of my smart home system. I had installed the system myself years ago, bypassing the main network. It was a redundancy I never thought I would use. I brought up the camera feeds again. They were still in the study. Bradley was on the phone impersonating me. He was talking to my banker. I listened as my son mimicked my voice perfectly, authorized a transfer of $200,000 to an offshore account. He was good. Terrifyingly good. He had obviously been practicing this for months. Monica was sitting on my desk, going through my private files. She held up my living will. She laughed and tossed it into the shredder. She said they needed to draft a new one tonight, forge my signature, and backdate it. She said she wanted everything. The house, the portfolio, the vintage car collection. She said she didn't want to leave even a cent for charity. I watched them erase my legacy. I watched them dismantle my life. And I felt a cold smile spread across my face. They were so greedy. They were moving so fast. And in their haste, they were making mistakes. I picked up the burner phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. Leonard Katz, my old lawyer. The man they called the swamp alligator because once he bit down, he never let go. Leonard answered on the second ring. He sounded surprised. He asked Garrison, "Is that you?" I told him to stop talking and listen. I told him I needed him to open a file. Not a defense file. A war file. He asked who we were suing. I looked at the screen, at the image of my son celebrating his victory with my wine. I told Leonard we aren't suing anyone. We are hunting. I told him to meet me at the hotel in 1 hour and to bring the forensic accountant team. I hung up and poured myself a glass of water. I took the first pill to start clearing the poison from my veins. I looked at the camera feed one last time. Bradley was holding up the empty bottle of Petrus. He looked happy. "Enjoy it, son," I whispered to the empty room. "That is the most expensive drink you will ever have. It just cost you $50 million. I sat down at the desk and opened a blank document. I typed a header. Operation Ghost Flight. Step 1 was complete. I knew the truth. Step 2 was the setup. I needed to give them exactly what they wanted. I needed to play dead. If they wanted a helpless, dying old man, I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I would let them think they had won. I would let them sign the papers. I would let them transfer the money. I would let them dig their hole so deep that they would never see the sky again. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. The transfer Bradley had authorized had gone through. $200,000 gone. It was a lot of money. But it was just the bait. I closed my eyes and visualized the chessboard. I was 3 moves ahead. Tomorrow, I would plant the seed that would destroy them. I would leave a digital trail that would lead them not to my fortune, but to a trap so complex, so legally binding, that even the best lawyers in New York wouldn't be able to save them. The sun had fully set now. The city lights were twinkling below me. I felt a strange surge of energy. The heartbreak was gone, replaced by pure, crystallized adrenaline. They wanted to inherit my empire. Fine. I would show them exactly how I built it, by being the most ruthless man in the room. Tomorrow, the game begins, and I always win. I drove north on Interstate 95, leaving the toxic wreckage of my life behind in the Hamptons. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel of the Bentley until my knuckles turned white. But it was not just rage that made them tremble. It was a physical weakness I had been ignoring for months. As the adrenaline from the shocking revelation at the roadside began to fade, the reality of my physical condition crashed down on me. My chest felt tight, like an invisible band of iron was slowly constricting around my ribs. My vision blurred intermittently, turning the headlights of oncoming traffic into streaks of blinding white light. For 6 months, I had convinced myself this was just the price of aging. I was 69 years old. I had lived a high-stress life. I had accepted the narrative that I was simply fading away. But now, with the image of Monica pouring arsenic-laced tea fresh in my mind, every symptom took on a sinister new meaning. The chronic nausea wasn't indigestion. The metallic taste in my mouth wasn't a side effect of blood pressure medication. The brain fog that made me forget where I put my keys or what day of the week it wasn't early onset Alzheimer's. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being murdered. I needed answers that couldn't be bought or influenced. I couldn't go to a hospital in the city where my name was on the donor wall. I couldn't go to any doctor who might know Bradley or have access to my digital records. I needed a ghost. I needed Elias Aris. Elias was a man I had known since the 80s. He had been a brilliant trauma surgeon before burnout, and a messy divorce drove him into a semi-reclusive private practice in rural Connecticut. He didn't ask questions. He didn't care about insurance. He only cared about the truth. I pulled into the gravel driveway of his secluded farmhouse just as the rain began to fall. The house was dark, save for a single light in the converted garage he used as a clinic. I stumbled out of the car, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. When Elias opened the door, his eyes widened. He didn't see the Titan of Wall Street. He saw a dying man. He helped me into the exam room. It was stark, smelling of rubbing alcohol and old books. I sat on the paper-covered table, shivering despite the warmth of the room. Elias didn't waste time with pleasantries. He took one look at my pale skin, the spider veins on my cheeks, and the tremors in my hands, and he began to work. He rolled up my sleeve. His touch was professional, but I could feel the concern radiating off him. He asked me what I had taken. I told him nothing. I told him I just drank the tea my daughter-in-law made me. The tea, she said, was full of antioxidants. The tea she promised would help me sleep. Elias frowned as he drew vial after vial of dark red blood. He took hair samples. He checked my nail beds, pointing out the white horizontal lines that I had assumed were just calcium deficiencies. Mace's lines, he whispered. A classic sign. The waiting was the hardest part. Elias went into his back lab to run the rapid toxicology panels. I sat alone in the silence, listening to the rain hammer against the tin roof. This was the moment the doubt started to creep in. Was I wrong? Maybe the camera feed was a hallucination. Maybe I really was losing my mind. Maybe I was just a paranoid old man who couldn't accept that his time was up. I looked at my hands. They looked like the hands of a stranger. Old, withered, weak. I thought about Dr. Thorne, my primary care physician for 20 years. The man I played golf with. The man who had sat in my study 3 months ago looked me in the eye with deep sympathy and told me I had aggressive early-stage dementia. He had prescribed me sedatives. He had told Bradley to take over my finances because the stress would kill me faster. Thorne was Bradley's friend too. They went to the same club. They drank the same scotch. How much had Bradley paid him? Was it a direct bribe, or simply the promise of managing the Ford family trust once I was gone? The betrayal stung worse than the poison. Thorne had used his medical license to validate my murder. He had built the perfect cover story. If I died of a heart attack, no coroner would look twice at an old man with a documented history of heart issues and dementia. It was the perfect crime. The door opened, snapping me out of my spiral. Elias walked back in. He wasn't holding a chart. He was holding a piece of paper with raw data printouts. He didn't sit down. He stood in front of me, removing his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He told me to listen carefully. He said my blood arsenic levels were 20 times the normal limit. He said there was also a significant concentration of digoxin, a heart medication derived from foxglove. I stared at him. I don't take digoxin, I said. My voice sounded raspy, foreign. Elias nodded grimly. He said he knew. He said digoxin in a healthy heart causes arrhythmias. Combined with arsenic, which weakens the blood vessels and damages the heart muscle, it is a ticking time bomb. He looked at me with an intensity that scared me. He said if I had stayed home tonight, if I had drunk one more cup of that tea, my heart would have stopped before morning. The room seemed to tilt. The confirmation was a physical blow. It wasn't a theory anymore. It wasn't a suspicion. It was biology. It was chemistry. My son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I held when he cried over his first breakup, had been systematically feeding me rat poison and heart stoppers for half a year. Elias asked if I wanted him to call the police. He reached for the phone. I stopped him. I put my hand over his. No police, I said. Not yet. Elias looked at me like I was insane. He said, "This is attempted murder, Garrison. They are killing you." I stood up. The weakness was still there, but something else was rising to the surface. A cold, hard resolve that I hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of the market crashing, the feeling of chaos, the feeling of opportunity. I told him that if we call the police now, they get arrested. They get lawyers, they get bail. They get a trial that drags on for years while they spend my money on their defense. They might even get off on a technicality. Dr. Thorne would testify I was senile and took the wrong meds by accident. No, that was too easy. That was too clean. I looked at the toxicology report in Elias's hand. That piece of paper was my weapon. It was my shield. I asked Elias for the treatment. I asked him how we flushed this out. He told me I needed chelation therapy, powerful drugs that bind to the heavy metals and strip them from the body. It would be painful. It would be exhausting. It would take weeks to fully clear my system. But he could start me on an oral regimen tonight. He warned me that the side effects would mimic the flu: nausea, fatigue, pain. I told him I didn't care about the pain. I cared about clarity. I asked him if the fog would lift. He said yes. Once the arsenic levels drop, your brain function will return to normal. The confusion will vanish. You will be sharp again. That was all I needed to hear. I took the prescription. I paid him in cash, a stack of bills thick enough to ensure his silence and cover the cost of the unauthorized lab work. I told him to keep the file hidden. I told him if anything happened to me, if I was found dead in a ditch or a hotel room, he was to take this file to the FBI immediately. But until then, I was a ghost. Walking back out to the car, the night air felt different. It was cold, biting, and real. The fog in my brain hadn't lifted yet, but the fog in my soul had vanished. I wasn't a confused old man anymore. I wasn't a burden. I was a man who had survived a 6-month assassination attempt by his own flesh and blood. I sat in the driver's seat of the Bentley and looked at the bottle of pills Elias had given me. The antidote. My son thought he was playing the long game. He thought he was smart. He thought he could slowly erase me from the world, turn me into a trembling, forgetful shell, and then discard me. He didn't realize that by poisoning my body, he had immunized my heart against any remaining affection I had for him. I swallowed the first pill without water. It tasted bitter, like chalk and iron. I started the engine. The powerful purr of the motor was a comfort. I wasn't going back to the Hamptons. I wasn't going to the police station. I was going to war. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. I had a lot of work to do. I had assets to freeze. I had a will to rewrite. And I had a trap to set. A trap so intricate, so devastating, that by the time Bradley and Monica realized they were caught, the walls would already be closing in. Dr. Thorne had said I had Alzheimer's. He said I was forgetting who I was. He was wrong. I remembered exactly who I was. I was Garrison Ford, and I was about to remind everyone else, too. The rain was hammering against the windshield of the Bentley as I parked it a mile down the road, hidden behind a dense cluster of oak trees on an old service path. I could not risk the engine noise alerting them. I turned off the ignition and sat for a moment in the darkness. The silence of the woods was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the storm. My chest still ached, a dull, throbbing reminder of the arsenic coursing through my veins. But the first dose of the chelation medication was beginning to work. My mind felt sharper than it had in months. The fog was lifting, revealing the jagged edges of the reality I now had to navigate. I was a stranger in my own life, an intruder approaching the fortress I had built to protect the very people who were now trying to kill me. I stepped out into the rain, pulling the collar of my trench coat up. The cold water felt good on my face. It felt like a baptism. I walked through the mud, navigating the perimeter of my estate by memory. I didn't head for the front door or the service entrance. I headed for the old stone folly in the garden, a decorative ruin that sat near the edge of the property. To anyone else, it was just a piece of landscaping. To me, it was the entrance to a Cold War relic. When I bought this estate in the 80s, the previous owner was a paranoid tycoon convinced the Russians were coming. He had built a reinforced tunnel connecting the garden folly to a panic room located directly behind the library in the main house. I had never used it. I had laughed at it. But I had maintained it, oiling the hinges and keeping the keypad active. I never thought the enemy I would need to hide from would be sleeping in my own guest room. I brushed away the wet ivy covering the stone panel and punched in the code. It was my late wife's birthday. The keypad beeped softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the night, and the heavy door clicked open. The air inside was stale and smelled of damp earth and old concrete. I clicked on my penlight, the thin beam cutting through the darkness. The tunnel was narrow, forcing me to hunch my shoulders. Every step was a battle. My legs were weak from the poison, and my heart hammered against my ribs, not from exertion, but from a terrifying anticipation. I was walking toward the truth, and I knew the truth would shatter whatever was left of my heart. It took me 10 minutes to reach the steel door at the end of the tunnel. This was the entrance to the panic room. I entered the code again. The hydraulic seals hissed as the door released. I slipped inside and locked it behind me. The panic room was exactly as I had left it years ago. A small, windowless concrete box filled with non-perishable food, water, and a high-tech surveillance system that I had upgraded just last year. It was cold, the air conditioned and recycled. I sat down in the single ergonomic chair in front of the bank of monitors. My hands hovered over the controls. This room shared a wall with my private study. A large one-way mirror was concealed behind the bookshelf in the study, allowing me to look directly into the room from here if I slid the panel back. But first, I turned on the monitors. The screens flickered to life, bathing my face in a pale blue glow. I saw the kitchen, dark and empty. I saw the hallways, and then I saw the study. They were there. Seeing them on my phone screen in the car had been a shock, but seeing them now, in high definition, just a few feet away through the wall, was a visceral violation. The room where I had made million-dollar deals, the room where I had read bedtime stories to Bradley when he was a bourgeois, had been turned into a war room against me. Bradley was sitting at my desk. My desk. He was hunched over a stack of documents, a pen in his hand. He wasn't reading. He was writing, over and over again. I zoomed in with the camera. The motion was repetitive, obsessive. He was practicing my signature. I watched my son, the boy I had sent to the best private schools, the man I had bailed out of failed startups and gambling debts, carefully trying to replicate the loop of the G in Garrison. He would write it, compare it to a letter of mine he had pinned to the desk, and then curse. "No," he muttered, his voice coming through the speakers crisp and clear. "The tale is too long. The bank will flag it." Monica was standing by the fireplace. The fire was roaring, consuming the oxygen in the room. She was holding a heavy binder. I recognized the blue spine immediately. It was my old life insurance policy, the one that named the St. Jude's Children's Hospital as the primary beneficiary. "You are overthinking it, Bradley," she said, her voice dripping with boredom. "He is an old man with shaky hands. If the signature looks a little off, they will just think he was having a bad day, or that the dementia is affecting his motor skills. That is the beauty of the narrative we built." She ripped a handful of pages from the binder and tossed them into the fire. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the flames licking at the words that were meant to save sick children. She wasn't just stealing from me. She was stealing from the innocent. She was burning my legacy to fuel her greed. Bradley slammed the pen down. "I need the power of attorney to look perfect, Monica. If we use this to empty the investment accounts before the probate court freezes them, it has to be flawless. One suspicious teller, and we are done." Monica walked over to him and massaged his shoulders. She leaned down, whispering in his ear, "No one is going to be suspicious, baby." Dr. Thorne already put the note in his file about the tremors. We have the medical trail. We have the loving son taking over for his incapable father. It is perfect. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the arsenic. They had weaponized my trust. Every time I had complained about a shaking hand or a memory lapse, they hadn't been comforting me. They had been taking notes. They had been building a case file for my incompetence. Bradley picked up the pen again. He looked at the paper. "How much longer do you think?" Monica glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. "The clock my father had given me." She shrugged. "He took a heavy dose this morning, and with the stress of the drive, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but definitely before the weekend. We need to have these transfer forms ready to go by Friday morning." I sat in the dark panic room, my fists clenched so hard my fingernails dug into my palms. I wasn't scared anymore. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a cold, mathematical rage. I looked at Bradley's face. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look conflicted. He looked annoyed that forgery was difficult work. He looked like a man trying to finish a chore so he could go play. I reached out and touched the glass of the monitor. I remembered teaching him to write. I remembered his chubby little hand gripping a crayon, his tongue sticking out in concentration as he wrote his name for the first time. I had framed that piece of paper. I still had it in a box in the attic. And now, he was using those same hands to sign my death warrant. He finally produced a signature he liked. He held it up to the light. "There," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "That is Garrison Ford." Monica kissed him. "That is $50 million, she corrected him. I leaned back in the chair, the darkness of the panic room wrapping around me like a shroud. I had seen enough. I didn't need to hear any more. I had the intent. I had the method. I had the timeline. They gave me 3 days to die. I looked at the control panel. I could record this. I could send it to the police right now. They would be arrested within the hour. But as I watched Monica pour herself another glass of my wine and kick her shoes off onto my desk, I realized that prison was too good for them. Prison offers structure. It offers meals. It offers a chance at parole. No. I didn't want them in a cell. I wanted them in a cage of their own making. I wanted them to feel the high of victory before I pulled the floor out from under them. I wanted them to sign those papers. I wanted them to commit the crime. I wanted them to walk into the bank with their heads held high and the ink drying on their felony. I pulled a small notebook from my pocket. My hand was steady as I wrote down my observations. Time. Date. Specific documents destroyed. Specific admissions of guilt. This wasn't a diary, it was an indictment. I stood up. My legs felt stronger now. The anger was a powerful fuel. I took one last look at the monitor. Bradley was laughing at something Monica said. They looked like a happy couple. They looked like the future of the Ford dynasty. I turned off the monitors, plunging the room back into darkness. I didn't need to see them anymore. I knew exactly who they were. They were children playing with matches in a house made of dynamite. And they had no idea that I was the one holding the detonator. I unlocked the tunnel door. It was time to leave. I had to get back to the city. I had to meet Leonard. We had a trap to build. As I walked back through the damp, narrow tunnel, leaving the warmth of my home behind, I didn't feel like I was fleeing. I felt like I was hunting. They thought the old lion was dying in his cave. They were about to find out that the lion was simply waiting for the hyenas to get close enough to bite. The tires of my Bentley hissed against the wet asphalt as I merged onto the Long Island Expressway, heading west toward Manhattan. I was leaving the physical scene of the crime, but the crime followed me inside the cabin of the car. My phone sat on the passenger seat, vibrating with an incoming call that made my stomach lurch. The screen lit up with a photo of my son, a picture taken at his college graduation 10 years ago. He looked so innocent then, smiling in his cap and gown, his arm around my shoulder. I stared at the face of the boy I had raised and the face of the man who was currently trying to stop my heart. I knew I had to answer. If I didn't, he would worry that the poison had worked too quickly, or worse, that I was ignoring him. Silence breeds suspicion, and I needed him to feel secure. I needed him to think everything was proceeding exactly according to his twisted schedule. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump, forcing my body to relax into the posture of a tired, confused old man. I cleared the sharpness from my throat and answered on the third ring. "Hello, Bradley," I said. I made my voice waver slightly, adding a tremor that wasn't there before. "Is that you, son?" "Hey, Dad." His voice filled the car speakers, bright and chirpy. It was a performance, a sickeningly sweet tone he saved for when he wanted money or forgiveness. "We just landed in Malay. You wouldn't believe the color of the water here. It is like turquoise glass. Monica is already trying to run into the ocean." I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. He was lying through his teeth with the ease of a sociopath. I had just watched him sitting in my study in New York, drinking my wine. He wasn't in the Maldives. He was 40 miles behind me, forging my signature. He was likely using a soundboard app to play ocean sounds in the background. I strained my ears and, sure enough, I heard the faint, looped cry of a seagull. "That sounds wonderful, son," I said, forcing a cough. "I am so glad you made it safely. I was worried about the flight." "Don't worry about us, Dad," he said, dismissing my concern. "How are you feeling? Did you have your tea tonight?" Monica was worried she made it too strong. The audacity took my breath away. He was checking to see if I had taken the lethal dose. He wanted to know if the arsenic was currently burning through my stomach lining. I paused for a long moment, letting the silence stretch just enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I answered, "Yes, Bradley." I drank it. It was bitter, but I finished it. "Good," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "It is good for your heart, Dad. Dr. Thorne said you need to stick to the routine. Make sure you finish the whole pot before you go to bed. We want you to be strong when we get back." "I will, son," I whispered. "I promise. I will drink every last drop." I wasn't lying. I would drink the cup of bitterness he had served me until it was empty, and then I would smash the cup over his head. "Get some rest, Dad. We will call you tomorrow." "Love you." "Love you too," I said. The line went dead. I let out a roar of frustration that tore at my throat. The "love you" at the end was the final insult. It was a habitual lie, a reflex. I tossed the phone onto the seat. I was approaching the Midtown Tunnel. The lights of New York City rose up before me, a glittering canyon of steel and glass. This was my battleground. This was where I had made my name. In the Hamptons, I was Garrison Ford, the retiree, the grandfather figure, the target. But here in the concrete jungle, I was a predator. I drove straight to the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue. I didn't use the main entrance. I used the private residence entrance around the side, a privilege I retained from when I owned a floor of the building in the 90s. I had called ahead to secure the penthouse suite under the name of a dormant LLC. As I rode the elevator up to the 39th floor, I called Leonard Katz. Leonard was the kind of lawyer other lawyers had nightmares about. We had started out together 40 years ago. He was 70 now, still practicing, still sharp as a razor. He didn't have clients, he had accomplices. "Leonard," I said when he picked up, "I am at the Pierre. Suite 3900. Bring the red file, and bring a forensic accountant you trust with your life." "Garrison, it is 10 o'clock at night," Leonard grumbled. "This better be good." "It isn't good, Leonard. It is a murder investigation. And the victim is me." That got his attention. He was at my door in 45 minutes. When Leonard walked in, he looked at me and frowned. "You look like hell, Garrison." "I feel like hell," I admitted, pouring him a scotch while I stuck to water. "My own son is poisoning me, Leonard. Arsenic and digoxin. I have the toxicology report from Elias Aris. I have video footage of them in my study right now, forging my signature to empty the trust." Leonard sat down slowly, his face losing all color. He read the report. He watched the video clip on my laptop. When he looked up, the grumbling old man was gone. The swamp alligator was present. "We call the district attorney," Leonard said, his voice low and dangerous. "We get them arrested tonight. Attempted murder, fraud, elder abuse. I can have them in cuffs before sunrise." "No," I said, cutting him off. I stood by the window, looking down at Central Park. "Arresting them is too easy. They have money, my money, to hire defense teams. They will plead insanity. They will plead coercion. They will drag my name through the mud for years. And even if they go to prison, they will sit in a cell thinking they almost won." "Then what do you want, Garrison?" Leonard asked. I turned to face him. "I want the Ghost Protocol." Leonard's eyes widened. He hadn't heard me use that term since the hostile takeover of Omnicorp in '89. The Ghost Protocol was a nuclear option. It wasn't just about defense. It was about total, systemic annihilation of an opponent's financial reality. "You want to bankrupt your own son?" Leonard asked softly. "I want to erase him," I said. "I want him to wake up and realize that every asset he thinks he owns is a mirage. I want him to sign those papers he is forging right now, and I want those papers to be the trap door that drops him into hell." I sat down across from Leonard and laid out the plan. It was intricate. It relied on the fact that Bradley and Monica were greedy but lazy. They understood money, but they didn't understand the plumbing of the financial system. First, I instructed Leonard to quietly contact the private banking division of the trust. We weren't going to freeze the accounts. Freezing them would alert Bradley when the transfer failed. Instead, we were going to shadow mirror them. We would create a duplicate interface for my online banking. When Bradley logged in using my stolen credentials, he would see the balance he expected. He would see $50 million. He would be able to execute trades and transfers. But it would all be a simulation, a sandbox environment. The real money, I explained to Leonard, needs to be moved tonight. Transfer the liquid assets into the irrevocable charitable trust we set up for the St. Jude Foundation. But leave the Cayman account visible. "The Cayman account," Leonard said, raising an eyebrow. "The honeypot." Exactly. I had set up a shell account in the Cayman Islands years ago as part of a sting operation with the IRS to catch a partner who was embezzling. The account was still active, but it was flagged by every federal agency in the book. Any money that moved in or out of that account triggered an immediate Level 1 alert at the FBI and the Treasury Department. "I'm going to leave the credentials for that account where Monica can find them," I said. "They will think it is my secret stash, my tax evasion money. They won't be able to resist. They will try to drain it." And when they do, Leonard finished the thought, a smile creeping across his face, "They won't just be stealing from you. They will be committing federal wire fraud, money laundering, and international banking violations. They will be stepping onto a landmine that the U.S. government planted." Precisely. I wanted them to face federal charges. No parole. No plea deals. Just 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Leonard pulled out his laptop. He cracked his knuckles. "I hope you know what you are doing, Garrison. Once I execute the Ghost Protocol, There is no going back. The Saint. Jude transfer is irrevocable. You are effectively giving away your fortune to destroy your son. I looked at the screen where the live feed of my study was still playing. Bradley was pouring another glass of my wine. My fortune is already gone, Leonard, I said. It died the moment my son decided my life was worth less than a Ferrari. If I have to burn down the kingdom to kill the rats in the walls, hand me the match. Leonard nodded. He began to type. For the next 4 hours, we worked in silence. We rewrote the architecture of my life. We moved real estate titles into holding companies owned by the charity. We changed the beneficiary designations on the life insurance policies. We stripped Bradley Ford of every future cent he was expecting. By 3 a.m, it was done. I was technically a pauper. My billions were now the legal property of a children's cancer ward, effective immediately, though the public transfer wouldn't register for 48 hours. Leonard closed his laptop. It is done. The trap is set. Now we just need them to take the bait. I stood up, feeling the fatigue finally crash over me. The chelation drugs were making my joints ache, but my mind was clear. They will take it, I said. Greed is a predictable beast. It always eats until it bursts. Leonard stood to leave. He paused at the door. You should try to sleep, Garrison. You have a big performance tomorrow. I do, I said. What is the role? He asked. I smiled, a cold, humorless expression. The victim. After Leonard left, I lay down on the stiff hotel sheets. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, rehearsing my lines. I had to sound weaker tomorrow. I had to sound like I was fading. I had to convince Bradley that the timeline was accelerating. I had to make him panic. Because when people panic, they make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, they leave fingerprints. I picked up the burner phone and looked at the text from Rosa again. Stay safe. I was safe. I was But Bradley and Monica? They were standing in the crosshairs of a rifle they didn't even know was aimed at them. I closed my eyes and waited for the sun to rise. The ghost protocol was active. The hunt had begun. The dawn light over Manhattan was cold and gray, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite at the Pierre. I stood there with a cup of black coffee, looking out at the city that was waking up, unaware of the war I was waging from the 39th floor. My body was screaming for rest. The chelation medication was stripping the arsenic from my blood, but it was taking a toll. My joints felt like they were packed with ground glass, and a persistent headache throbbed behind my eyes, but I could not sleep. Not yet. I had one final piece of the trap to set, the most dangerous piece. Leonard and I had built the cage, but a cage is useless without bait. We had moved the legitimate assets into the charitable trust, shielding them from Bradley's grasp, but simply denying him the money wasn't enough. If he went to the bank on Monday and found the accounts empty, he would be furious. Yes, he would scream and threaten litigation. He might even try to contest the trust in court, dragging my name through the mud for years. He would play the victim. He would say his senile father was manipulated by lawyers. He would walk away a free man, perhaps even with a settlement just to make him go away. No. That outcome was unacceptable. I needed him to cross a line from which there was no return. I needed him to commit a crime so egregious, so undeniable, that no jury in the world would look at him with anything but disgust. I needed him to steal money that the federal government was watching. I turned away from the window and sat down at the sleek glass desk in the living room. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed with the familiar interface of my email account. This was the key. I knew my son better than he knew himself. I knew he was lazy. I knew he was entitled. But most of all, I knew he was paranoid. He believed everyone was hiding something from him because he was always hiding things from everyone else. He had spent the last 6 months searching for my secrets, convinced I had a hidden stash of gold bars or offshore accounts that I wasn't telling him about. Today, I was going to prove him right. I had left my old iPad in the library back at the house. It was sitting on the side table next to my reading chair, right where I always left it. I knew Monica had been going through it. I had seen the fingerprints on the screen via the hidden camera weeks ago. She monitored my emails, my browsing history, looking for signs of dementia or weakness. Today, she would find something else. I clicked on New Message. My heart rate picked up speed. This had to be perfect. The tone had to be exactly right. It couldn't look like a trap. It had to look like a mistake. A slip-up by an old man who was losing his grip. I typed the recipient's name. Jean-Luc Vasseur. He didn't exist, of course, but the email address looked official, tied to a defunct Swiss banking domain I had purchased years ago for corporate espionage protection. Subject line: Cayman liquidation. Urgent. I began to type the body of the email. I wrote it slowly, channeling the voice of a man who was scared and secretive. Jean-Luc, I wrote, I need to move the funds from the Cayman Black account immediately. The $80 million is not safe there anymore. My health is failing faster than I expected. If anything happens to me, I do not want this money going through the U.S. probate courts. The taxes would be ruinous, and I do not want my son to have access to this much unsupervised capital. He is not ready. Please prepare the wire transfer instructions for the shell company in Panama. I will send the final authorization codes tomorrow. I read it over. $80 million. It was a number large enough to blind them. It was enough to buy private islands, jets, and political influence. It was the kind of money that makes people stop thinking and start drooling. I didn't hit send. Sending it would leave a record. Instead, I saved it to the drafts folder. The beauty of modern technology is the cloud. The moment I saved that draft on my laptop in Manhattan, it synced instantly to the iPad sitting on the table in the Hamptons. It was a digital landmine, armed and waiting for someone to step on it. Now, all I had to do was wait. I pulled up the camera feed on the large monitor. The house was quiet. It was early, barely 7 in the morning. Bradley and Monica were likely still asleep in the master bedroom, my bedroom, dreaming of the fortune they thought was already theirs. I forced myself to drink some water. I took another chelation pill. The nausea rolled over me, but I pushed it down. I needed to be alert. An hour passed, then 2. The sun climbed higher. I watched Rosa enter the library to dust. My heart clenched. If she moved the iPad, if she turned it off, the plan might fail. But Rosa was a creature of habit. She dusted around the device, careful not to disturb her employer's things. She was a good woman. I made a mental note to double her severance package and set up a college fund for her grandson. At 9:30, the door to the library opened. Monica walked in. She was wearing one of my late wife's silk robes. The sight of it made my jaw tighten. She looked like the queen of the castle, walking with an arrogant sway that made my skin crawl. She was holding a cup of coffee. She walked over to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked gardens. Then, she turned and saw the iPad. I leaned forward in my chair. This was it. She picked it up. She didn't turn it on immediately. She looked at the door, checking to see if she was alone. Then, she pressed the home button. She knew my passcode. Of course she did. I had probably told it to Bradley years ago for an emergency, and she had extracted it from him. She opened the email app. I could see the reflection of the screen in the mirror behind her. She refreshed the inbox. Nothing interesting there. Just spam and newsletters. She was about to put it down. My heart hammered against my ribs. Don't put it down. Look deeper. Then her finger hovered. She tapped the drafts folder. I saw her posture change instantly. Her spine stiffened. She froze. She was reading. I could almost hear her thoughts. Cayman. 80 million. Not safe. Son not ready. Her eyes went wide. She read it again, and then a third time. She looked around the room frantically, as if she expected the money to materialize out of thin air. She set the coffee cup down on the antique table without a coaster, leaving a ring. She didn't care. She turned and ran out of the room. I switched the camera feed to the hallway, then to the master bedroom. Bradley was still in bed, scrolling on his phone. Monica burst in, waving the iPad like a weapon. "Bradley!" she screamed. "Wake up! You need to see this, right now!" Bradley sat up, startled. "What is it? Is he dead? Did the hospital call?" "No, you idiot! Look at this! He has been holding out on us. He has been lying to us for years." She shoved the iPad into his face. Bradley grabbed it, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He read the email draft. I watched his face transform. Confusion gave way to shock. And then, inevitably, to the same hungry look I had seen on a wolf before it strikes. 80 million? Bradley whispered. His voice was trembling. He has $80 million in the Caymans? Why didn't he tell me? Because he thinks you are a loser, Bradley, Monica yelled, pacing the room. Read the email. He is not ready. Unsupervised capital. He was going to move it to Panama. He was going to hide it from us forever. Bradley stood up, pacing alongside her. The greed was taking hold, overriding any lingering sense of caution. 80 million. Do you know what we could do with that? We would never have to worry about the trust allowance again. We would be kings. We have to get it, Monica hissed. We have to get it before he sends this email. If he moves it to Panama, it is gone. We will never find it. But how? Bradley asked, looking at the device. It says he needs authorization codes. We don't have the codes. Think, Bradley. Monica grabbed his shoulders and shook him. Where does your father keep his old files? The red ledger. The one in the safe behind the painting. I saw him looking at it last Christmas when he thought I wasn't watching. He said it was old tax returns. I bet the codes are in there. I smiled in the empty penthouse. Monica was smarter than Bradley, but she was also more predictable. She had seen me with the red ledger because I wanted her to see me with it. I had planted that seed 6 months ago. The red ledger didn't contain tax returns. It contained the access codes to the Cayman account. The trap was layered. Go check the safe, Monica ordered. Now! Bradley didn't argue. He ran out of the room, still in his boxers. I switched the feed back to the study. Bradley burst in, tore the painting of the hunt scene off the wall, and spun the dial on the wall safe. He knew the combination. 1985-04. His birth date. I had made it easy for him. A sentimental choice that now felt like a cruel joke. The safe door swung open. He grabbed the red leather-bound book. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He flipped through the pages frantically. There it was. On the last page, a list of alphanumeric codes under the heading CI Holdings. I found it, he yelled. Monica, I found it. Monica ran in, breathless. Log in. Do it now. Use his laptop. The iPad is too slow. Bradley sat down at my desk. He opened my MacBook. He navigated to the banking portal listed in the ledger. It was a generic-looking login page for a private offshore bank. It looked real because it was real, a real front for a federal sting operation. He typed in the account number. He typed in the password from the book. The screen loaded. I knew what it showed. A balance of $80 million. Oh my God, Bradley breathed. It is real. It is actually real. Monica was leaning over his shoulder, her eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen. Her face was twisted in a rictus of pure avarice. Transfer it. Transfer all of it. Where? Bradley asked. To our Shell account in Nevis, she said. The one we set up for the kickbacks. It is untraceable. Do it now, Bradley. Before the old man wakes up and deletes the draft. Bradley hesitated for a fraction of a second. His finger hovered over the enter key. This is wire fraud, Monica. If we get caught... Monica slapped the back of his head. Who is going to catch us? The old man is dying. By the time anyone notices this money is gone, he will be dead and buried, and we will be on a beach in non-extradition territory. Do you want to be a millionaire, or do you want to be a coward living on an allowance? Bradley looked at the screen. He looked at the number. 80 million. He made his choice. I am doing it, he said. He began to type in the transfer details. I sat back in my chair in Manhattan. The trap had snapped shut. They hadn't just taken the bait. They had swallowed the hook, line, and sinker. By accessing that account, by using those codes, and by initiating an international transfer of funds from a flagged federal account, they had just triggered alarms at the FBI, the IRS, and the Treasury Department. I picked up my burner phone and sent a single text message to Leonard. It is done. They are in. I watched Bradley hit submit. The screen flashed a confirmation message. Transfer pending. They cheered. They actually hugged each other, jumping up and down in my study like children who had just won a game. They were celebrating their own destruction. I felt a profound sadness wash over me, a final grieving for the son I had lost long ago. But as I watched them pop the cork on another bottle of my wine to celebrate their theft, the sadness hardened back into resolve. Enjoy the champagne, I whispered to the screen, because the hangover is going to be a life sentence. I closed the laptop. The bait had been taken. Now it was time for the execution. I needed to prepare for my return from the dead. I stood up and walked to the closet where my tuxedo hung. I brushed the lapel. Tonight, I would not be wearing a hospital gown. I would be wearing armor. And I would walk into that house not as a victim, but as the judge, jury, and executioner of their comfortable lives. The silence in the penthouse was heavy, broken only by the hum of the server cooling fans and the rhythmic thrumming of my own heart. On the high-definition monitor in front of me, I watched the two rats scurrying inside the maze I had built for them. Bradley and Monica were in my study, huddled around my laptop like vultures picking at a carcass. The glow of the screen illuminated their faces, which were twisted in a mixture of greed and panic. They had the account number. They had the username from the red ledger. But they had hit a wall. I zoomed in on the screen. The offshore banking portal, the fake one I had set up with the help of the FBI's cyber division years ago, was asking for a password. It was a simple white box with a blinking cursor, but to them it was an iron gate standing between them and $80 million. Bradley was sweating. I could see the sheen on his forehead. He was typing in combinations, slamming the enter key, and then cursing as the text invalid credentials flashed in red. He tried my birthday. He tried his birthday. He tried the street address of our first home. He tried Monica's name. "Stop guessing, you idiot!" Monica hissed, her voice tinny through the surveillance speakers. "You are going to lock the account. If we get locked out, we can't reset it without his biometrics. We need the password." Think, Bradley. What would he use? I leaned back in my chair, sipping a glass of water. The chelation medication was doing its work, pulling the heavy metals from my blood, but it left me feeling hollowed out, as if my bones were vibrating. But the pain was useful. I needed to sound weak. I needed to sound like a dying man who was losing his grip on reality. I knew exactly what they were doing next. Bradley pulled out his phone. He opened the spyware app he had installed on my phone 3 months ago. He thought he was so clever. He thought I didn't know about the malware hidden inside the weather app he had insisted on downloading for me. He had been listening to my calls, tracking my GPS, reading my texts. That was how they knew when I was meeting with my lawyer. That was how they knew when I went to the bank. I had left the back door open for them. I had never removed the spyware. I kept it there for this exact moment. I needed a direct line to their ears, a channel where I could feed them disinformation that they would believe was absolute truth because they thought they were stealing it. I picked up my burner phone. I dialed my own voicemail. I knew that the spyware recorded every outgoing call, regardless of whether someone answered. To Bradley, it would look like I was leaving a desperate, secret message for my attorney. I cleared my throat, letting a rasp creep in. I slumped forward, compressing my diaphragm to make my breath sound shallow and labored. I hit the call button. On the monitor, I saw Bradley's head snap up. He held up a hand to silence Monica. He tapped his phone screen. He was listening to me live. I began to speak, my voice trembling. Leonard. Leonard, pick up. It is Garrison. I paused, letting a long, ragged wheeze escape my lips. I am at the hotel. The chest pains. They are getting worse, Leonard. I don't think the pills are working. I feel like I am drowning. I watched Bradley. He was grinning. He pointed at the phone and gave Monica a thumbs up. He was happy I was dying. Listen to me, Leonard, I continued, injecting a note of frantic urgency into my tone. We cannot wait until Monday. The Cayman account, the 80 million, we have to move it. If I die tonight, if my heart gives out, the government will seize it. Or worse, Bradley will find it. He is not ready, Leonard. He will blow it on gambling and cars in a week. He doesn't understand the responsibility. Monica's face darkened on the screen. She mouthed the word bastard. I need you to access the portal for me, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I can't. My hands are shaking too much to type. The username is in the red ledger. You have that. But the password, I changed it last month. I changed it to the only date that still matters to me. I saw Bradley lean in closer to his phone. He was practically vibrating. This was it, the key to the kingdom. It is the day I lost her, Leonard, I said, letting a genuine tear slide down my cheek. The memory of that day was the only real thing in this entire performance. October 12th, 1998, the day Elizabeth died, the day the light went out of my life. That is the password, 10121998. No spaces, just the numbers. Use it, Leonard. Move the money to the Panama shelter. Do it now. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the penthouse, my hand trembling slightly. That date was sacred. It was the day my wife, Bradley's mother, had lost her battle with cancer. It was the day I had held her hand as she took her last breath, promising her that I would protect our son. Using that date as the trap code felt like a violation, but it was a necessary one. It was the ultimate test. If Bradley had a single shred of humanity left, hearing that date, hearing his father's grief, should have made him pause. It should have sparked a moment of hesitation, a memory of his mother, a pang of guilt. I watched the screen. Bradley didn't hesitate. He didn't look sad. He didn't look down. He didn't even acknowledge that I was talking about the death of his own mother. He just looked at Monica and shouted, I got it! It is Mom's death day, 10/12/98! Monica clapped her hands. Type it in! Hurry! I watched my son type the numbers. 10121998. He typed them with force, with excitement. He was using the date of his mother's death to steal from his father. The irony was so sharp, it felt like a physical knife in my gut. He had stripped the date of all its tragedy and reduced it to a sequence of keys that would unlock a vault. He hit enter. The screen on my laptop, mirroring their view, spun for a second. Then it flashed green. Access granted. "We are in!" Bradley screamed. He jumped out of the chair, pumping his fist in the air. "We are in, baby! Look at that balance!" Monica pushed him aside and stared at the screen. $80 million. It is beautiful. They hugged each other. They danced around my study, celebrating. They were so blinded by the number on the screen that they didn't notice the faint background sound of the trap snapping shut. By logging in with those credentials, they had just crossed the Rubicon. They had accessed a federal sting account. Their IP address, their device ID, their location, and the timestamp were currently being logged by the FBI servers in Quantico. They hadn't just committed attempted theft. They had committed wire fraud, unauthorized access to a protected financial system, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. I watched them high-five. Bradley grabbed the bottle of Petrus and took a swig straight from the bottle. "We did it," he said, wiping wine from his chin. "The old man is dying in a hotel room, crying to his lawyer, and we just took everything." "Transfer it," Monica commanded. "Transfer it to the Nevis account." Bradley sat back down. He cracked his knuckles. "Goodbye, Dad. Thanks for the inheritance." He began to type in the transfer order. I closed my eyes for a moment. The grief I had felt earlier was gone. It had been burned away by the acid of their indifference. They had just proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they were beyond redemption. They had danced on my grave before I was even in it. They had trampled on Elizabeth's memory for cash. I opened my eyes and looked at the screen one last time. "Go ahead, son," I whispered. "Push the button." Bradley hit the transfer funds button. "Processing," the screen read. They cheered again. I reached for my phone and texted Leonard. "The Eagle has landed." They executed the transfer. Leonard replied instantly. "FBI has the logs. Warrants are being drafted. Do you want to intervene?" I looked at the image of my son and his wife, laughing, drunk on stolen wine and perceived victory. "No," I typed back. "Let them finish the bottle. I want them to have a hangover they will feel for the next 20 years. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were bright below me. The game was over. They had lost. They just didn't know it yet. For the next 48 hours, they would live in a fantasy world where they were rich, powerful, and free. They would probably book flights. They would probably look at real estate. They would dream. And I would let them. Because the fall is always much harder when you think you are flying. I touched the cold glass of the window. "Happy anniversary, Elizabeth," I whispered into the empty room. I kept my promise. I protected him. I protected him from the monster he has become. The only way to save him now is to stop him. I turned off the lights in the penthouse, leaving only the glow of the surveillance monitors. The rats had eaten the cheese. Now, all that was left was to collect the bodies. The air in the penthouse suite had changed. It was no longer the quiet sanctuary of a grieving father or the war room of a vengeful businessman. It had become an operating theater. The lights were dimmed, casting long, blue shadows across the room from the bank of high-definition monitors we had set up against the far wall. I sat in the center, flanked by Leonard Katz on my right, and a man I had only known by reputation until tonight. Special Agent Miller of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, on my left. Miller was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, silent and observant, his eyes fixed on the screen where my son was about to destroy his life. There was no wine in the penthouse, no music, just the hum of the server racks Miller's team had installed to ensure a secure, latency-free connection to the sting operation. We were watching a crime in real time, but unlike any other robbery in history, we had given the thieves the keys, the map, and the combination. On the main screen, the feed from my study was crystal clear. Bradley was sitting at my mahogany desk, the glow of the laptop illuminating his face. He looked manic. The alcohol had flushed his cheeks, and his movements were jerky, filled with a nervous energy that vibrated through the camera lens. Monica stood behind him, her hands gripping the back of his chair, her fingernails digging into the leather. She was the architect of this moment, whispering into his ear, urging him forward, blinded by the promise of $80 million that didn't exist. Agent Miller leaned forward, tapping a key on his own laptop. He spoke for the first time in an hour, his voice dry and professional. "We are live on the transaction server, Mr. Ford. The connection is secure. We have a direct mirror of their keystrokes. Every input is being logged by the Bureau's cyber division in D.C. As soon as he initiates the transfer, the trap is sprung." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt tight. I was watching my son, the boy I had taught to fish off the pier in Montauk, the boy I had bailed out of trouble more times than I could count, preparing to commit a federal felony. I wanted to scream at the screen. I wanted to break the glass and shake him. I wanted to tell him to stop, to walk away, to just be a decent human being for once in his life. But I stayed silent. I had to. The boy I loved was already gone. The man on the screen was a stranger, a parasite who had decided my life was the only obstacle to his happiness. On the screen, Bradley was navigating the interface of the fake offshore bank. We had designed it to look intimidating, a relic of the old banking world, full of complex disclaimers and security warnings. A warning popped up on the screen in red text. It stated clearly that unauthorized access to this account was a violation of international banking laws and subject to prosecution. It was a final chance, a final moral stop sign. Bradley didn't even read it. He clicked, "I agree," without a second of hesitation. Monica laughed, a sound that came through the speakers like breaking glass. "Look at that," she said. "They try to scare you with fine print. Just click through it, baby. Get to the money." Leonard shifted in his chair beside me. He took off his glasses and cleaned them, a nervous tick I hadn't seen in years. "He knows what he is doing, Garrison," Leonard whispered. "Look at his face. There is no hesitation. There is no guilt." I looked. Leonard was right. Bradley wasn't conflicted. He was exhilarated. He was typing in the routing numbers for the shell account in Nevis that Monica had set up. He was double-checking the digits, not out of fear, but out of precision. He wanted to make sure every single cent of the $80 million landed in his pocket. Agent Miller spoke again, narrating the legal reality of what we were seeing. "He has entered the routing number. That is the first strike. Conspiracy to commit money laundering. He is knowingly directing funds from a flagged account to a non-extradition jurisdiction. That alone is 5 years." Bradley typed in the amount. $80 million. He added the zeros with a flourish, hitting the keys hard. "Second strike," Miller said. "Attempted grand larceny. The amount puts this in a special bracket of federal sentencing." Then came the final step. The screen asked for the confirmation code. This was the failsafe I had built into the fake site. It required a biometric confirmation or a secondary password. Bradley didn't have my fingerprint, obviously, but he had the red ledger. He grabbed the book from the desk, flipping pages frantically until he found the backup codes I had planted. He read the code aloud, his voice trembling with excitement. Alpha 7, Victor 9. He typed it in. The screen changed. It showed a final button, a simple gray rectangle with the word transfer. This was it. The moment of no return. The room in the penthouse went deathly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. I felt like I was watching an execution, but I wasn't sure if it was my son's execution or the execution of my own heart. Bradley hovered his finger over the enter key. He looked up at Monica. "We are going to be free," he said. His eyes were wide, shining with tears of joy. No more allowance. No more begging the old man for cash. We are going to own the world. Monica kissed the top of his head. "Do it," she whispered. "Push the button and bury him." I closed my eyes. The image of the button burned into my eyelids. "Do it," I whispered to myself. I heard the click. It was a soft sound, a plastic tap of a key on a keyboard, but it echoed in the penthouse like a gunshot. I opened my eyes. On the monitor, the fake banking screen flashed a spinning wheel. Processing. In the penthouse, Agent Miller's laptop lit up with a cascade of data. Streams of code ran down his screen in green and red. "Target confirmed," Miller said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The packet has been received. The wire request was logged at 10:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the IP address. We have the device ID. We have the geolocation pinpointed to your estate in the Hamptons." He turned to me. "Mr. Ford, the crime is complete. By hitting that key, your son just committed federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and because the account he tried to access is technically federal property used for sting operations, he has also committed defrauding the United States government." Bradley and Monica didn't know this, of course. On their screen, the spinning wheel stopped and was replaced by a green checkmark. "Transfer successful. Funds pending settlement." The reaction in the study was explosive. Bradley jumped out of the chair so fast it tipped over. He screamed, a primal, guttural roar of victory. Monica shrieked and leaped into his arms. They spun around the room, knocking over a stack of books, laughing hysterically. "We are rich!" Bradley yelled. "We are filthy, stinking rich!" Monica grabbed the bottle of Petrus and chugged from it, wine spilling down her chin, staining her white silk robe red. "To Garrison Ford," she toasted, mocking me, "the generous benefactor of our new life. May he rest in peace, preferably by tomorrow morning." I watched them celebrate. They looked like lottery winners. They hugged. They kissed. They started talking over each other, making plans. A yacht in the Mediterranean. A penthouse in Dubai. They were spending the money they had just stolen, unaware that the only thing they had purchased was a federal indictment. Leonard placed a hand on my shoulder. "It is over, Garrison. They are done. There is no lawyer on earth who can get them out of this. We have the video. We have the data logs. We have the intent." I looked at the screen, at the son I had held in my arms when he was a baby. I remembered the day he was born. I remembered promising to give him the world. I had failed. I had given him too much, and it had rotted him from the inside out. Agent Miller closed his laptop. "I will forward the evidence package to the U.S. Attorney's Office immediately. The warrants will be signed by a judge within the hour. We can move in whenever you are ready, Mr. Ford." I stood up. My legs felt heavy but steady. The nausea was gone. The confusion was gone. All that was left was the cold clarity of the aftermath. "Not yet," I said. "Let them have their night. Let them go to sleep thinking they are kings. Let them wake up and pack their bags." I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "I want the arrest to happen at the party," I said, turning back to Miller. "They are hosting a gala on Saturday. A celebration of my retirement, they called it. They invited everyone. My business partners, the board members, their high society friends." Miller nodded slowly. "You want to take them down in public?" "I want witnesses," I said. "I want everyone to see who they really are. I don't want rumors. I don't want speculation. I want the truth to be as bright and undeniable as a spotlight. Leonard sighed. It will be brutal, Garrison. Betrayal is brutal, Leonard, I replied. Justice is just the balance. I looked back at the screen one last time. Bradley and Monica had collapsed onto the sofa, exhausted from their celebration, the laptop still glowing on the floor. They looked peaceful, innocent even. But the digital footprint they had just created would follow them for the rest of their lives. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only ash. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I had cut the limb to save the body. Agent Miller packed up his gear. We will have teams in position on Saturday. The moment you give the signal, we breach. Thank you, Agent, I said. As they left the room, leaving me alone in the blue glow of the monitors, I sat back down. I watched my son sleep. Sleep well, Bradley, I whispered. Dream of your yachts and your Ferraris. Because when you wake up, the only thing you will own is the jumpsuit on your back. I turned off the monitor. The screen went black, erasing them from my sight. But in the darkness of the penthouse, I didn't feel alone. I felt the presence of every decision I had ever made, leading me to this moment. The perfect crime had been committed, but the punishment was going to be even more perfect. 3 days of silence is a long time in the world of the living, but in the world of the guilty, it is an eternity that feels like a warm bath. Bradley and Monica had taken my silence as confirmation. They assumed the arsenic had finally done its job, stopping my heart in that hotel room at the Pierre. They assumed the maids would find my body eventually, or perhaps they didn't care if I was ever found at all, as long as the wire transfer cleared. And it had cleared. To their eyes, $80 million sat in their Nevis account, a golden parachute large enough to carry them away from any consequences. They were drunk on the illusion of victory, so drunk that they decided to dance on my grave before the dirt was even tossed. Saturday night in the Hamptons is usually a quiet affair for old money. We value privacy. We value discretion. But new money, stolen money, screams. Through the surveillance monitors in the back of a blacked-out surveillance van parked a quarter-mile from my own driveway, I watched my estate transform into a circus. They had hired a lighting crew to bathe the stone facade of the house in garish purple and gold lights. They had set up a tent in the rose garden, Elizabeth's rose garden, trampling the prize-winning hybrids she had cultivated for 20 years to make room for a DJ booth and a champagne tower. I watched cars line up at the gate. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Maybachs. These weren't my friends. These weren't the titans of industry or the quiet philanthropists I associated with. These were Bradley's crowd, the trust fund kids who had never worked a day in their lives, the influencers chasing clout, the sycophants who smelled money and swarmed like flies. I sat in the van, adjusting the cuffs of my tuxedo. Leonard Katz sat across from me, looking grim. He was checking his watch. The FBI team was in position, disguised as catering staff and security guards. We were ready. But I needed to wait. I needed the moment to be ripe. I needed them to be at the absolute peak of their arrogance before I cut the strings. On the screen, I saw Bradley greeting guests at the door. He was wearing one of my vintage velvet smoking jackets. It was too big for him in the shoulders, making him look like a child playing dress-up in his father's closet. He was holding a glass of scotch, my 30-year-old Macallan, and laughing too loudly. "Welcome, welcome," he shouted to a group of young men who looked like they were barely out of college. "Come in! The bar is open! Everything is on the house tonight." I turned up the audio feed. "Where is the old man?" one of the guests asked, looking around. I thought this was his house. Bradley waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, Dad?" He is retired, effectively, immediately. He decided the stress was too much. He is taking a permanent vacation. He handed the keys to the kingdom over to me and Monica. We are running the show now. Permanent vacation. That was their code for dead. He was telling his friends I was gone without actually saying the words, basking in the ambiguity. He looked so confident. He truly believed he had gotten away with the perfect crime. He thought he was the new king of Wall Street, standing on the corpse of the old lion. Then Monica appeared. When I saw her, the breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't anger this time. It was a sharp physical pain that pierced right through the layer of detachment I had built up over the last few days. She was wearing a white silk gown, cut low, shimmering under the chandelier lights. But it wasn't the dress that froze my blood. It was what she was wearing around her neck. Pearls. Not just any pearls. A triple strand of South Sea pearls with a diamond clasp. I had bought those pearls for Elizabeth on our 30th anniversary. I had put them around her neck myself, her hands trembling with joy as she looked in the mirror. She had worn them to our son's graduation. She had worn them in the last family portrait we ever took. After she died, I had locked them in the wall safe in the master bedroom, intending to give them to Bradley's wife one day, if he ever married a woman worthy of Elizabeth's memory. I never gave them to Monica. She knew they were off limits. She knew they were sacred. And yet, there she was, parading them around a room full of strangers, letting them bounce against her chest as she laughed and threw her head back. She was drinking champagne, spilling a little on the floor, treating the necklace like costume jewelry. It was a desecration. It was a final spit in the face of the family she had poisoned. Leonard saw my expression. He reached out and touched my arm. "Easy, Garrison," he whispered. "Don't lose focus. Use it." I took a deep breath, forcing the red mist in my vision to clear. I wouldn't lose focus. I would sharpen it. That necklace was the final nail in her coffin. She wanted to wear the crown? Fine. She would wear the chains too. Inside the house, the music grew louder. The bass thumped against the walls, shaking the family portraits I had hung in the hallway. I watched as a young woman with blue hair knocked a vase off a side table. It shattered. Bradley just laughed and kicked the pieces under the rug. "Who cares?" he yelled. "We will buy a new one. We will buy 10. He climbed onto a chair in the center of the living room. He whistled loudly, demanding attention. The music lowered slightly. The crowd turned to look at him. He raised his glass high. "Everyone listen up," he bellowed. "I want to make a toast to the future. For years, you guys have watched me live in the shadow of the great Garrison Ford. You watched me beg for scraps. You watched me wait my turn. Well, the waiting is over," the crowd cheered. Monica walked up to him, wrapping her arms around his leg, looking up at him like an adoring subject. "My father," Bradley continued, putting on a mock sad face, "isn't doing well. His mind, you know how it is. He is confused. He is lost. He signed everything over to us a few days ago because he knew deep down that he couldn't handle it anymore. He knew I was the better man." Laughter rippled through the room. "So tonight isn't just a party," he shouted. "It is a coronation. We are $80 million richer than we were on Monday. And we are just getting started." The room exploded in applause. Corks popped. People were chanting his name. Bradley, Bradley, Bradley. I watched him soak it in. He really believed it. He believed he had won because he was smarter, stronger, better. He didn't realize that the only reason he was standing on that chair was because I had built the floor beneath it, and I was about to pull the lever. Agent Miller's voice crackled in my earpiece. "Mr. Ford, we are ready. The perimeter is secure. No one leaves. Do you want us to go in?" "No," I said into the microphone hidden in my lapel. Not yet. I am going in first. Alone. Leonard looked at me, alarmed. Garrison, that is dangerous. He is unstable. He might be armed. He is a coward, Leonard, I said, opening the door of the van. Cowards only bite when you aren't looking. I want him to look me in the eye when his world ends. I stepped out into the cool night air. The noise from the party drifted across the lawn. I straightened my jacket. I adjusted my cufflinks. I walked toward the house, not through the shadows, but right up the main driveway, under the glare of the security lights I had installed. The gravel crunched under my dress shoes. A few guests smoking outside near the fountain saw me approaching. They stopped talking. They squinted, trying to recognize the silver-haired man walking with such purpose. Isn't that? One of them whispered. I ignored them. I walked up the stone steps to the front door. The bouncer, a hired muscle I didn't recognize, put a hand out to stop me. Private party, pal. Invitation only. I stopped and looked at him. I didn't raise my voice. I simply projected the authority that had once made CEOs crumble in boardrooms. Get your hand off me, I said, or you will be explaining to a judge why you assaulted the owner of this property. The bouncer hesitated. He looked at my face, then back at the door. He recognized me. His eyes went wide. He stepped back, lowering his head. Mr. Ford. I didn't know. I pushed past him. I pushed open the double oak doors and stepped into the foyer. The noise was deafening. The smell of expensive perfume and marijuana hung heavy in the air. People were dancing in the hallway. A couple was making out on the stairs. I stood there for a moment, an island of stillness in a sea of chaos. Then, I walked into the ballroom. The DJ was spinning a heavy beat. Bradley was still on the chair, pouring champagne into the mouths of his friends. Monica was dancing on the table, the pearls bouncing, her laughter shrill. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. I simply walked to the DJ booth. The DJ, a kid with headphones around his neck, looked up at me, annoyed. Hey man, back off the... I reached out and pulled the power cord from the main amp. The music died instantly. The silence that followed hit the room like a physical blow. The sudden absence of sound left people disoriented. They stopped dancing. They looked around, confused. Hey! Bradley yelled from the center of the room. Who turned off the music? Turn it back on! He turned, looking for the source of the interruption. And then he saw me. I was standing by the DJ booth, bathed in the spotlight that was meant for him. I stood tall. I stood strong. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't confused. I looked directly at him. The glass of scotch slipped from Bradley's hand. It hit the floor and shattered, splashing amber liquid over his velvet shoes. His face went from flushed red to a sickly, ghostly white in the span of a heartbeat. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. Monica froze on the table. She stared at me, her hands flying up to cover the pearls at her throat, a reflexive gesture of guilt. The crowd sensed the tension. They followed Bradley's gaze. A hush fell over the room, rippling outward until the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall. "Dad?" Bradley whispered. It was a small, broken sound. "Hello, son," I said. My voice carried across the silent room, calm and cold. "I hear you are celebrating my retirement." Bradley stumbled off the chair. He almost fell. He caught himself on a guest's shoulder. "But you..." he stammered. "We thought... you didn't answer the phone. We thought... you thought I was dead." I finished the sentence for him. "You thought the arsenic and the digoxin had finally done the job." You thought the 3 days of silence meant you were free. Gasps erupted from the guests. People started backing away from Bradley and Monica, sensing that the party was over and something dark was unfolding. Bradley shook his head frantically. No! No! Dad, you are confused. That is the dementia talking. You are sick. We were worried about you. We were just... Stop, I said. The single word cracked like a whip. I walked toward him. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I stopped 5 feet away from him. I looked at Monica, who was still perched on the table, trembling. Take off the necklace, Monica, I said softly. She clutched the pearls tighter. These are mine. You gave them to me. I never gave them to you, I said. I gave them to a woman who knew the meaning of loyalty, a woman who would rather die than hurt her family. You are not fit to touch them. Take them off now. She fumbled with the clasp, her fingers shaking so badly she couldn't undo it. She yanked it, snapping the string. Pearls cascaded onto the floor, bouncing and rolling across the parquet like spilled marbles. The sound of them hitting the wood was the sound of her facade shattering. Bradley stepped forward, trying to regain control. Dad, listen. We need to get you to a doctor. You are making a scene. You don't know what you are saying. I reached into my tuxedo pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a speech. It was the toxicology report. I know exactly what I am saying, Bradley, I said, holding the paper up. I know about the tea. I know about Dr. Thorne. I know about the forgery. And I know about the $80 million you transferred to Nevis 3 nights ago. Bradley's eyes bulged. He looked around at his friends, at the business partners who were now staring at him with horror. That is a lie, he screamed, his voice cracking. He is crazy. He is senile. Someone call security. Get him out of here. No one moved. The bouncers stood by the door, arms crossed. They worked for the house, and they knew who the master of the house was. You really thought you could kill me and take my life? I asked, taking a step closer. You thought I was just a doddering old man you could erase? I leaned in close so only he could hear the next words. But in the silence, half the room heard them anyway. I built this empire by eating men like you for breakfast, Bradley. You didn't kill the shark. You just woke him up. Bradley looked at the door. He was calculating his odds. He was thinking about running. Don't bother, I said. Look outside. He turned to the window. Through the glass, the red and blue lights of police cruisers began to flash, silently at first, then accompanied by the wail of sirens that cut through the night air. The party is over, son, I said, and the bill has come due. The chaos in the ballroom was a living thing, a beast of confusion and murmurs that swirled around my son. He was standing there, his face pale, trying to explain away the police lights flashing through the sheer curtains, trying to tell his guests that it was just a misunderstanding, a prank, a mistake. He was desperate to hold on to the illusion of power for just a few seconds longer. He raised his hands, shouting for order, shouting for the DJ to bring the beat back, shouting that everything was under control. But I was done with illusions. It was time for the cold, hard reality to be projected 10 feet tall. I stood in the shadows of the doorway, unnoticed by the frantic crowd, and I touched the small Bluetooth transmitter in my pocket. It was the signal Leonard and the technical team were waiting for. The lights in the ballroom didn't just dim, they died. Total, absolute darkness swallowed the room. The sudden plunge into blackness silenced the crowd instantly. The screams of laughter and the clinking of glasses ceased. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the sound of nervous breathing and the rustle of expensive fabrics. Then the massive projection screen that Bradley had set up to display a slideshow of his own vanity, photos of his cars, his vacations, his success, flickered to life. But it wasn't a picture of Bradley smiling on a yacht. It was a grainy, high-definition video feed. The timestamp in the corner read 3 days ago. The setting was my private study. A collective gasp ripped through the room as the image sharpened. Everyone recognized the room. Everyone recognized the two people in it. The audio boomed through the concert-grade speakers Bradley had rented, clear and crisp, stripping away any ambiguity. "It is done," Monica's voice echoed through the dark ballroom. "I doubled the dose in his tea this morning." On the screen, the guests watched in horrified fascination as Monica held up a small glass vial. She swirled the liquid inside, catching the light. She looked demonic, her face twisted in a smile that was devoid of any humanity. "How long?" Bradley's voice asked from the speakers. It was the voice of a man impatient for his inheritance. "Dr. Thorne said 3 days," Monica replied on the screen. "The arsenic builds up. Then the digoxin triggers the arrhythmia. It will look exactly like a heart attack. The old man won't even know he is dying. He will just go to sleep, and we will wake up rich." I watched the crowd. In the ghostly blue light reflecting off the screen, I saw their faces. I saw disgust. I saw shock. I saw the friends who had been drinking Bradley's champagne 5 minutes ago cover their mouths with their hands. They weren't looking at a party host anymore. They were looking at a monster. The video cut to a different clip. This one was Bradley, sitting at my desk, forging my signature. "I just need to get the loop right," he muttered on screen. "Once I sign this power of attorney, we can drain the accounts before the funeral home even picks up the body." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier than the darkness. It was the silence of a courtroom before the gavel falls. It was the silence of judgment. Then, a single spotlight snapped on. It hit center stage. But Bradley wasn't standing there. He had backed away, cowering near the champagne tower, looking like a rat caught in a floodlight. The spotlight found me. I stepped out from the double doors. I didn't walk like the frail, confused old man they had all heard rumors about. I didn't have my cane. I didn't have the stoop in my shoulders that I had exaggerated for the last 6 months. I wore a tuxedo that had been tailored in London 20 years ago, a suit of armor made of black wool and silk. My spine was steel. My head was high. I walked with the predatory grace of the man who had built this estate from the ground up, the man who had survived market crashes and corporate raids. I walked through the crowd. They parted for me instinctively, scrambling to get out of my path, as if my very presence was a physical force. No one said a word. The sound of my dress shoes striking the marble floor echoed like a metronome counting down the seconds of my son's freedom. I saw former business partners in the crowd, men who had avoided my calls recently because they thought I was senile. They looked down, ashamed to meet my gaze. I saw the social climbers who had latched onto Monica. They were already trying to inch toward the exits. I reached the stage. I walked up the stairs, each step deliberate. I walked past the DJ booth where the terrified kid was trembling. I walked to the center of the platform, where a microphone stand waited. I grabbed the microphone. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked directly at Bradley. He was shaking, physically vibrating with terror. His face was a mask of sweat and tears. Monica was on the floor next to him, sobbing, her makeup running in black streaks down her face, the pearls she had stolen scattered around her knees like broken teeth. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice was calm. It was the voice of a man who had already grieved and had nothing left to lose. "You are celebrating my funeral a little early, aren't you?" The words hung in the air, cold and biting. Bradley made a sound, a pathetic whimper. "Dad, please. It was a joke. It was all a joke." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "A joke," I repeated. Is that what you call attempted murder, Bradley? Is that what you call poisoning the father who raised you alone? Is that what you call forging my name to steal $80 million from a federal sting account? The crowd murmured. The words 80 million and federal sting rippled through the room like a shockwave. I gestured to the screen behind me, which was now black. You wanted a show, Bradley. You wanted to be the star. Well, here is your standing ovation. I looked out at the guests. Get out, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room. This is not a party. This is a crime scene, and anyone who stays will be considered an accomplice. Pandemonium broke out. People began to run. The veneer of high society crumbled instantly as guests shoved each other to get to the doors. But the doors didn't open. The FBI agents who had been posing as security stepped forward, blocking the exits. Agent Miller walked onto the stage. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing his windbreaker with the bold yellow FBI letters on the back. Bradley Ford, he announced, his voice booming without a microphone. Monica Ford, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. Bradley tried to run. It was a pitiful attempt. He scrambled toward the kitchen door, slipping on the spilled champagne, knocking over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. 2 agents were on him in a second. They slammed him against the wall, the impact shaking the expensive art frames. I watched as they pulled his arms behind his back. I heard the metallic click of the handcuffs. It was a sound I had imagined for 3 days, but hearing it in reality didn't bring me joy. It brought me a profound, hollow sense of finality. Monica screamed as a female agent pulled her up from the floor. She kicked and spat, reverting to a feral state. She looked at me, her eyes wild. "You did this!" she shrieked. "You tricked us! You set us up!" I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at her. "I didn't trick you, Monica," I said. "I just gave you the rope. You were the one who tied the noose. You were the one who decided that my life was worth less than a bank transfer." Bradley was crying now, begging as the agents dragged him toward the door. "Dad! Dad! Stop them! I am your son! You can't let them take me! I am your son!" I looked at him. I looked at the face that resembled my own, the eyes that were the same shade of blue as his mother's. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, the ghost of the love I once had for him. "I had a son," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "He was a good boy. He loved baseball. He loved his mother. But that boy died a long time ago. I don't know who you are, but you are certainly not my son. You are just a thief who broke into my home." I turned my back on him. "Take them away," I said to Agent Miller. I stood on the stage as the room emptied. I stood there as my son was dragged out of the house he grew up in, screaming my name. I stood there as the guests were questioned and released, filing out into the night with their heads down, terrified of the scandal that would be all over the news by morning. I was left alone in the wreckage of the party. The floor was sticky with champagne. The flowers were trampled. The air smelled of sweat and fear. Leonard walked up to the stage. He looked tired. "Are you okay, Garrison?" he asked. I looked around the empty ballroom. I looked at the screen where the evidence of my murder had played. "No, Leonard," I said. "I am not okay. I just sent my only child to prison for the rest of his life." I walked down the stairs. I picked up a single pearl from the floor. It was cold and hard in my hand. "But I am alive," I whispered. "And for tonight, that has to be enough." I walked toward the front door, stepping over the debris of the celebration that never happened. I needed fresh air. I needed to wash the smell of this house off my skin. I walked out into the night, past the police cars, past the flashing lights. I looked up at the stars. They were the same stars I had looked at when I was a young man, full of ambition and hope. I was old now. I was alone, but I was free. And as the sirens faded into the distance, carrying the poison out of my life, I took the first deep, clean breath I had taken in 6 months. The shark was still swimming, and the ocean was wide open. The silence that had fallen over the ballroom was brittle, a sheet of glass waiting to be shattered. And my son was the hammer. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes darting from my face to the toxicology report in my hand, and then to the faces of the guests who were now looking at Hitsamlin with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him, stripping away the veneer of the confident air and revealing the terrified, cornered animal underneath. He realized there was no talking his way out of this. There was no charm offensive that could undo the video footage or the chemical facts in my hand. He snapped. It was a guttural, primal sound that ripped from his throat, a scream of pure, impotent rage. He didn't run away. He ran at me. "You are lying," he shrieked, lunging forward with his hands curled into claws. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to silence the voice that was dismantling his life. He scrambled up the stairs of the stage, his movements clumsy and frantic. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't even raise a hand to defend myself. I didn't have to. Two shadows detached themselves from the darkness on either side of the stage. My personal security detail, men who had been with me for a decade, stepped into the light. One of them, a massive former linebacker named Marcus, simply extended an arm. It was a casual motion, almost bored, but it met Bradley's chest with the force of a concrete wall. Bradley hit the arm and crumbled. The air left his lungs in a wheezing gasp. Marcus didn't strike him. He just held him there, pinned against the invisible barrier of his own inadequacy. Bradley flailed, swinging wild punches that hit nothing but air, screaming obscenities that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. It was pathetic. It was the tantrum of a child who had been told it was bedtime, except this child was 32 years old and had tried to commit patricide. I looked down at him. I felt no anger. I felt no fear. I felt only a profound, exhausting pity. "Let him go," I said to Marcus. Marcus stepped back. Bradley collapsed onto his knees, gasping for breath, looking up at me with eyes full of hate. I turned back to the crowd. I needed to finish this. I needed to make sure that when these people left this house, there would be no whispers, no rumors, only the cold, hard truth. I signaled to the technician in the booth. The screen behind me changed. The video of the poisoning disappeared, replaced by a static image. It was a screenshot of a bank transfer log. The crowd squinted against the glare. They were wealthy people. They understood money. They understood wire transfers, and they understood what they were looking at. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and amplified through the speakers, "what you are seeing behind me is a record of a transaction that occurred 3 nights ago. My son and his wife, believing I was incapacitated in a hotel room, used stolen credentials to access what they thought was a hidden offshore account. I walked over to Bradley, who was still kneeling, and pointed the microphone at him like an accusation. He transferred $80 million, I continued. He thought he was stealing my retirement fund. He thought he was securing his future. But in his haste and in his greed, he failed to realize one crucial detail about the account he accessed." I paused, letting the tension build. Monica scrambled to her feet. She looked disheveled, her expensive dress torn at the hem, her face a mask of defiance. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "We have the money," she screamed. Her voice was shrill, bordering on hysterical. "It is in our account in Nevis. I saw the confirmation. It cleared. You can't take it back. It is ours. Even if we go to jail, we will come out rich. We won." She looked around the room, desperate for validation. "Tell him, Bradley," she yelled at her husband. Tell him the money is safe." Bradley looked up, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. "She is right," he spat, wiping blood from his lip where he had bitten it. "The transfer went through. We moved it to a non-extradition bank. You can't touch it. You can arrest us, but you can't touch the money." I looked at them both and I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You really don't get it, do you?" I asked. "You think you are playing chess, but you are not even playing checkers. You are eating the pieces." I turned back to the screen. "Next slide," I commanded. The image changed. It was no longer a bank statement. It was a formal letter from the United States Department of the Treasury, dated 5 years ago. It was an agreement outlining a settlement for a complex tax liability audit involving my international holdings. I turned to the audience. 5 years ago, I entered into a settlement agreement with the IRS regarding some disputed capital gains from the 90s. The settlement amount was exactly $80 million. We set up a holding account to facilitate the payment, an account that was monitored directly by the federal government. I looked back at Monica. Her face had gone the color of ash. "The account you hacked," I said, leaning in close to the microphone. "The account you drained. It wasn't my personal savings. It was a holding escrow for the Internal Revenue Service." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone in the back actually started laughing, a nervous, shocked sound. "When you hit that transfer button," I continued, my voice hardening, "you didn't steal $80 million from me. You voluntarily paid my $80 million tax bill." Bradley's jaw dropped. He looked at the screen, then at me, trying to process the magnitude of the mistake. "No," he whispered. "No. That is impossible." "It is very possible, son," I said. "In fact, I received a thank you email from my tax attorney this morning. The IRS accepted the payment. The debt is cleared, and because the funds came from an account linked to your identity through the wire fraud you committed, the government now considers that payment final." I took a step closer to Monica. "So thank you, my dear daughter-in-law. You wanted my money. Instead, you just became the most generous donor to the United States Treasury in the history of this family. You are not rich, you are broke, and you just settled all my debts for me." Monica let out a scream that sounded less like a human voice and more like a steam whistle. She lunged at Bradley, hitting him in the chest. "You idiot!" she screamed. "You told me it was a secret slush fund. You told me it was untraceable. You gave them everything." Bradley pushed her away, looking at his hands as if they were covered in blood. "I didn't know," he stammered. "The ledger. The red book. It said Cayman Holdings." I shook my head. "You read the title, Bradley. You never read the fine print. That has always been your problem." I wasn't done. I had one more card to play. One final twist of the knife to ensure that they had absolutely nowhere to run. I pulled a folded document from my tuxedo pocket. "And there is one last thing," I said. The room went silent again. Even Monica stopped screaming. "You keep shouting about this house," I said, gesturing to the grand ballroom, the chandeliers, the marble floors. "You keep telling people to get out of your house. You keep talking about your inheritance." I unfolded the paper. It was a deed of sale. "I sold this estate at 9 o'clock this morning," I announced. Bradley looked up, his eyes bulging. "What? You can't." "The trust." "I dissolved the trust 3 days ago when I proved you were trying to kill me," I interrupted. "And this morning, I signed the closing papers with a developer from the city. He is planning to turn this land into a public park and a community center for at-risk youth." I held up the paper for everyone to see. "This property no longer belongs to the Ford family. It belongs to the state of New York. Which means, technically speaking, every single person in this room is currently trespassing. But more importantly, It means that you, Bradley, and you, Monica, are breaking and entering. I looked at the guests. If I were you, I would leave. The new owner is very strict about liability. That was the breaking point. The revelation that the money was gone, that the house was sold, that the party was a lie, was too much. The crowd turned on them. The friends who had been drinking their champagne started booing. Someone threw a glass. It shattered near Monica's feet. "You are a loser, Bradley," someone shouted from the back. "You tried to kill your dad for nothing," another voice yelled. Bradley stood there in the center of the ruin of his life. He looked small. He looked broken. He looked at me, pleading. "Dad, where am I supposed to go? You sold the house. You gave away the money. Where do I go?" I looked at him. I remembered the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I killed that memory right there and then. "You are going to prison, son," I said. "And the good news is, rent is free." I turned to Agent Miller, who had been watching the entire exchange from the side of the stage. "They are all yours, Agent." Miller signaled his team. 4 agents moved in, their movements crisp and professional. They grabbed Bradley and Monica. This time, there was no fight left in them. They were limp, defeated by the sheer weight of their own stupidity. As they were dragged past me, Monica looked up. Her mascara was running, her hair was a mess. She looked at me with pure venom. "I hope you rot," she hissed. I smiled. I leaned down and whispered in her ear. "I plan on living a very long time, Monica. My heart is stronger than you think, especially now that I have removed the poison." I watched them get dragged out the double doors, into the flashing red and blue lights of the night. The crowd parted to let them through, filming them with their phones, live streaming their downfall to the world. I stood alone on the stage. The house was sold. My son was gone. My debts were paid. I had burned it all down. And as I looked out at the empty, silent ballroom, I realized something. I had never felt richer. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers strobed against the high ceiling of the ballroom, turning the crystal chandeliers into disorienting, flashing sirens of judgment. The party was gone. The music was dead. The only sounds left in the cavernous room were the squawking of police radios and the heavy rhythmic breathing of my son as he was pressed face first into the cold marble floor by 2 federal agents. I stood near the grand staircase, watching the scene unfold with a detachment that surprised even me. For years, I had worried about Bradley. I had worried about his grades, his reckless driving, his gambling debts. I had spent nights pacing the floor, wondering if I would get a call from a hospital or a precinct telling me he had hurt himself. Now, looking at him pinned to the ground, his tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder, his expensive velvet loafers kicked off in the struggle, I realized I had stopped worrying. The anxiety was gone, replaced by the numb certainty of a surgeon who has just cut out a gangrenous limb. Agent Miller stood over him, reading him his rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Bradley wasn't remaining silent. He was sobbing into the floor, a muffled, pathetic sound that grated on my nerves. "Dad," he wailed. "Dad, please. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I didn't mean it. We can fix this. I will sign the money back. I will do anything." I didn't answer. I didn't even look at him. I looked at Monica. She was being held by a female agent near the ruins of the Champagne Tower. She wasn't crying. She was snarling. The mask of the loving daughter-in-law, the mask of the sophisticated socialite, had completely dissolved. In its place was the face of a cornered rat. She was spitting insults at the agents, threatening to sue them, claiming she knew senators and judges who would have their badges by morning. Leonard Katz stepped into the center of the room. He looked like an undertaker in his dark suit, holding a leather legal folio with the reverence of a priest holding a Bible. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the two prisoners. "Save your breath, Mrs. Ford," Leonard said, his voice cutting through her screeching like a razor. "You are going to need it for the interrogation room." Leonard opened the folio. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at Bradley. "Bradley Ford," he began, reading from the document with a dry, monotone precision. "You are being charged with 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, 1 count of federal wire fraud in excess of $50 million, 1 count of aggravated identity theft, and 1 count of defrauding the United States government." Bradley lifted his head, his face smeared with tears and dust. "How long?" he choked out. "How long for all that?" Leonard didn't blink. The sentencing guidelines for the wire fraud alone, given the amount and the target, carry a mandatory minimum of 20 years. Add the attempted murder of a family member using a chemical agent, which is a federal crime due to the interstate purchase of the arsenic, and the judge will likely stack the sentences. "You are looking at 25 years to life, Bradley, without the possibility of parole for at least 85% of the sentence. 25 years. I watched the number hit my son. I saw his eyes roll back slightly, his body going limp as the reality crushed him. He was 32 years old. He would be an old man, nearly my age, before he ever saw the outside of a prison wall again. He would miss the prime of his life. He would miss the world changing. He would rot in a cage, exactly as I had promised him. But Monica was different. She wasn't listening to Bradley's sentence. She was calculating. I could see the gears turning in her eyes. She thought she could flip. She thought she could blame it all on him. "It was his idea," she shouted, struggling against the handcuffs. "Bradley made me do it. He bought the poison. He forged the signature. I am just his wife. I didn't know anything." Leonard turned his gaze to her. He smiled, a thin, cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "We anticipated that defense, Monica," Leonard said softly. "Which is why we were very thorough with your background check." He flipped a page in the folio. "Monica Varez, also known as Monica Ford. You entered the United States 6 years ago on an O-1 visa for extraordinary ability in modeling. When that visa expired, you adjusted your status based on your marriage to a U.S. citizen, Bradley Ford." "So what?" Monica spat. "I have a green card. I am a resident. You can't touch me." "Actually," Leonard corrected her, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "Your permanent residency is conditional. It is contingent on good moral character and the validity of your marriage. By conspiring to murder your husband's father to steal his estate, you have committed a crime of moral turpitude under immigration law." Monica stopped struggling. She went very still. "Furthermore," Leonard continued, enjoying every syllable, "since you have not yet naturalized as a citizen, a conviction for an aggravated felony, which attempted murder certainly is, triggers an automatic deportation order." "Deportation?" she whispered. The word hung in the air, terrified and small. "Yes," Leonard said, closing the folio with a snap. "You won't be going to a regular federal prison, Monica. You will serve your time, likely 15 years as an accomplice. And the moment your sentence ends, you will be placed in ICE custody and put on a plane back to your country of origin. You will be stripped of your residency. You will be stripped of your assets. And you will be permanently barred from ever re-entering the United States." "No," Monica gasped. "You can't. I have nothing there. My family, I haven't spoken to them in years. I can't go back." "You should have thought of that before you poured arsenic into a teacup, Mrs. Ford," Leonard said, turning his back on her. The agents hauled them up. It was time to go. I turned away. I couldn't watch them walk out the door. I walked toward the French doors that led to the terrace. I needed air. I needed to escape the stench of their desperation. I stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was crisp and smelled of the ocean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. I walked to the stone railing and looked down at the driveway. From this height, the police cars looked like toys. I watched as the agents marched Bradley and Monica toward the waiting vehicles. They looked small, insignificant. They weren't the titans they thought they were. They weren't the masterminds who had outsmarted the old man. They were just two greedy children who had reached for the sun and burned their hands to ash. I saw Bradley stop at the door of the police cruiser. He looked up. He scanned the facade of the house, looking for me. I stepped forward into the light, letting him see me one last time. He froze. Even from this distance, I could feel his gaze. He opened his mouth to shout something, perhaps a plea, perhaps a curse, but the agent pushed his head down and shoved him into the back seat. The door slammed shut. It was a heavy, final sound, the sound of a vault locking. Then Monica was shoved into the second car. She was kicking the window, screaming silently behind the glass. The sirens chirped as the convoy began to move. I watched the red taillights snake down the long, winding driveway, past the manicured hedges, past the iron gates, and out onto the main road. I watched until they were just specks of light in the distance, and then finally, until they disappeared completely into the night. They were gone. My house was empty. My family was gone. I turned back toward the room. The ballroom was silent now. The agents were packing up their equipment. The few remaining staff members were cleaning up the broken glass. I walked over to the table where Bradley had been sitting. The bottle of Petrus, the 1982 vintage that Monica had been drinking from in the video, was sitting there. It was uncorked, breathing. I picked it up. This was the wine they had opened to celebrate my death. This was the wine she had poured down her throat while laughing about my heart stopping. I walked to the bar and grabbed a clean glass. I poured a generous amount. The wine was deep red, the color of blood, the color of life. I walked back to the balcony. I held the glass up to the moon. To Garrison Ford, I whispered to the empty night. I took a sip. It was exquisite. It tasted of blackberries, of oak, of earth. But mostly, it tasted of survival. I didn't cry. I had shed my tears months ago, in the doctor's office, in the lonely nights when I realized my son was a stranger. Tonight, there were no tears left. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of a balance sheet finally zeroed out. I finished the glass and set it down on the stone railing. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. I had a house to empty. I had a foundation to build. I had a life to reclaim. But for tonight, I was just a man standing on a balcony, breathing air that didn't taste of poison. I turned my back on the driveway and walked back inside. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth looking at. The future was the only thing that mattered now. And for the first time in a long time, the future belonged entirely to me. The Miami sun is a different kind of beast than the cold, gray light of New York. It does not hide anything. It burns clean. I stood on the terrace of my new penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay, watching the white yachts cut through the turquoise water. The air smelled of salt and jasmine, a stark contrast to the scent of old money and hidden rot that had permeated my life in the Hamptons. It has been exactly 1 year since the night the lights went out in the ballroom. 1 year since I watched the flashing red and blue lights carry my past away into the darkness. I turned back to the living room. It was modern, open, filled with light and art that I had chosen for myself, not for an investment portfolio. There were no dark corners here, no hidden cameras, no panic rooms. I didn't need them anymore. The only things I kept from my old life were the toxicology report, framed on my office wall as a reminder of what blind trust can cost, and the people who actually mattered. Rosa came out of the kitchen carrying a tray of iced tea. She was humming a song in Spanish, a sound that used to be terrified and quiet in my old house, but was now vibrant and full of life. She set the tray down on the glass table where her son, 10-year-old Mateo, was staring intensely at a chessboard. "Mr. Ford," Rosa said, smiling at me, "you are going to let him win today, right? It is his birthday." I walked over and sat opposite the boy. I looked at the board. Mateo was in a tight spot. His king was cornered, but he had a knight in a position that could turn the tide if he saw it. "In this house, Rosa," I said, looking at Mateo, "we do not give gifts that are not earned. Victory has no flavor if it is handed to you on a silver platter. So, right, Mateo?" Mateo looked up, his dark eyes serious. "Right, Mr. Garrison. I have to beat you for real." I smiled. That is my boy. I watched him think. He was smart, sharper than Bradley ever was at that age. I was paying for his private school now. I had set up a trust fund for his college, not a trust he could access to buy sports cars, but one that would pay for books, tuition, and travel. I was investing in his mind, not his entitlement. As he moved his bishop, my mind drifted back to the letter I had received yesterday. It was from the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville. The return address was simply Inmate 74921. Bradley. I hadn't opened it. I didn't need to. I knew what it said. The first few letters were angry, full of blame and threats. Then came the bargaining, the promises to change, the pleas for money to pay for protection inside. Now, I suspected, they were just hollow echoes of a man who was slowly realizing that the world had moved on without him. Leonard told me that Bradley was working in the prison laundry, earning 12 cents an hour. It would take him 400 million years to earn back what he had tried to steal in 4 minutes. And Monica. She was gone. Deported 3 months ago after her plea deal fell apart. Last I heard, she was back in her hometown, working in a retail store, telling anyone who would listen that she used to be a queen in New York. They probably laughed at her. Mateo moved his knight. "Check," he said confidently. I looked down. It was a bold move, a trap. He was baiting me to take his queen so he could flank me with his rook. I chuckled. "Very good, Mateo. You are learning the most important lesson. Sacrifice. You have to be willing to lose something valuable to win the war." I moved my king out of danger. I sipped the iced tea. It was sweet, cold, and safe. Every time I drank tea now, I took a moment to appreciate the absence of the metallic taste of arsenic. I had spent 6 months in chelation therapy, flushing the poison out of my system. My heart had recovered mostly. The arrhythmia was gone, though the scar tissue remained. But I wore those scars like medals. They were proof that I had survived the assassin who lived in my guest room. Rosa sat down on the sofa nearby, picking up a book. We were a strange family. An old white billionaire, a Mexican housekeeper, and her son. We didn't share blood. We didn't share a last name. But we shared something far stronger. We shared respect. Rosa had saved my life with a single text message. She had risked her job, her safety, her son's future, just to warn me. That was worth more than all the DNA in the world. People always say that blood is thicker than water. They say family comes first. They are wrong. Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. You don't choose your parents, and you don't choose your children. But loyalty. Loyalty is a choice. It is a deliberate, conscious act of devotion. It is standing by someone when it is dangerous, not just when it is profitable. I looked at Matteo. He was biting his lip, calculating his next move. He wasn't thinking about how much money I had. He wasn't thinking about when I would die so he could take my watch. He was just thinking about the game. He respected the rules. I reached out and moved my rook, putting pressure on his defense. "You know, Matteo," I said softly, "my son used to play chess with me, but he never wanted to learn the strategy. He just wanted to knock over the king and declare himself the winner. He thought the rules didn't apply to him." Matteo looked up. "Where is he now, Mr. Garrison?" "He is in a place where there are only rules," I said. "A place where he has a lot of time to think about the difference between being a king and being a pawn." I leaned back. The ocean breeze blew through the open doors, rustling the curtains. I felt a sense of peace that I had never found in the boardroom or the trading floor. I had sold the Hamptons estate to the state, just as I promised. They broke ground last week on the Ford Community Center. It would serve thousands of kids like Matteo, giving them a chance at a future. My legacy wasn't going to be a dynasty of spoiled heirs. It was going to be a foundation of hope. And the $80 million, the money Bradley had tried to steal. The IRS had been confused at first, but once the dust settled, they applied the credit to my future tax liabilities for the next decade. In a way, Bradley had done me a favor. He had prepaid my bills for the rest of my life. Matteo's hand hovered over the board. His eyes widened. He saw it. The opening I had left him. It was subtle, a tiny crack in my armor. But if he was brave enough, he could take it. "Do it," I whispered. "Don't hesitate. When you see the kill shot, you take it." Matteo grabbed his queen. He slid it across the board with a satisfying clack. "Checkmate," he said, a grin spreading across his face. I looked at the board. He was right. My king was trapped. There was no escape. I let out a laugh, a loud, genuine belly laugh that startled the seagulls on the railing. It was the first time I had lost a game of chess in 20 years, and it felt like the greatest victory of my life. I reached across the table and shook his small hand. "Well played, son," I said. "Well played." I stood up and walked to the balcony railing. I looked out at the horizon, where the blue of the sky met the blue of the ocean. I was 70 years old. I had lost my wife. I had lost my son. I had lost the life I thought I wanted. But standing here, in the warmth of the sun, with the sound of Rosa and Matteo laughing in the background, I realized I had found something much better. I had found the truth. I turned back to the camera, breaking the fourth wall for the final time. My face was weathered, lined with the history of 1,000 battles, but my eyes were clear. They say the price of betrayal is heavy. It destroys trust. It breaks hearts. It ruins lives. But they forget to tell you about the other side of the coin. The price of betrayal is also clarity. It burns away the lies until only what is real remains. I looked at the chessboard, where the white king lay toppled on its side. My son wanted to inherit my kingdom. He wanted the crown. But he forgot that a king without loyalty is just a man in a fancy hat waiting to be beheaded. I didn't destroy him. I just let him play his own game until he ran out of moves. I smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached my eyes. "Checkmate, Bradley." I turned and walked back into the room, towards the family I had chosen. The screen faded to black, leaving only the sound of the ocean and the quiet, steady beating of a heart that refused to stop. The most painful lesson I learned at 69 wasn't about money or business. It was about the lie of unconditional obligation. We are taught that we must support our family no matter what. But that is a dangerous myth. Love should never be a suicide pact. If someone hands you poison, whether it is in a teacup or in the form of emotional abuse, you have every right to knock it out of their hand and walk away. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Real family is not defined by whose name is on the birth certificate, but by who holds your hand when the darkness comes. I hope my story gives you the strength to set the boundaries you deserve. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to protect yourself from toxic family members, tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and survival. Until next time, stay safe and watch your back.